All right, so I told you I would see you on the other side, right? Well, here's a fun fact. Researchers found that nearly 60% of the different links that had been shared on Twitter have never been clicked. So people literally are sharing articles that they've never opened. And back in 2016, there was a site called the Science Post, and they published this fake article. The headline literally said, "People don't read science stories before they comment on them." And then the whole article was just a bunch of silliness. It was about like aliens and UFOs and Bigfoot and all these kind of just silly things, basically just garbage. And tens of thousands of people still shared the article without opening it. And really, it really spoke directly to the whole point that the researchers had. Ironically, the headline itself did say that people don't read science stories before commenting. So that's communication research in action, measuring how we behave versus how we say we behave. So this week we started by talking about where communication fits in the family tree of sciences. Right? We had the hard sciences that measure things that are concrete and easy to track. Things like your heart rate and the calories that you burned, or even the ECG of your heartbeat. But here's the thing, like my Apple Watch, it does all that already. So in reality, that's not very impressive, right? To be able to measure those tangible things. The social sciences, on the other hand, what we do in communication, we're out here trying to measure things that you can't just use an app for or a watch for, like trust in the media, or how to identify the way that your identity shifts between different social media sites. Why do we act different on one site than we do another? Or why one meme can blow up while another one just dies in the chat. So our job is to make the invisible visible. And honestly, that's a lot tougher than counting steps or heartbeats in somebody's walk that they're doing. So then we walked through the research process. Research isn't just guessing, it's very systematic. We start off by asking a question. We might say, hey, what causes some kind of socio-political movement to move from being online to offline, right? We've seen this quite a bit, whether it was the Arab Spring a few years ago, Occupy Wall Street, BLM, Me Too, Jan 6, right? We see all of these different political movements moving from an online forum to an offline. So that would be the question that we might ask. Then we might want to see what researchers have already said about political movements, social media behaviors, viral content, a thing called confirmation bias. We want to choose a method. Maybe we design a survey, maybe we do short interviews with different activists and everything like that to try to figure out what's going on. Once we determine that method that we're going to use, now we need to go out and collect that data. We need to ask those activists about their attitudes and beliefs, and maybe even their social media behaviors. We could do that by distributing a survey to a massive amount of people, or sitting down and talking with people through direct messages or face to face about how they feel about different things and their different behaviors that they have. Maybe have some interviews and focus groups, something a lot more small scale. Well, it doesn't matter if we're doing small scale or large scale, data is data, whether that's the transcripts from an interview or the results from a survey. Once we get that data, now we need to analyze it. We need to look for patterns. Maybe confirmation bias comes into play. Maybe it's the type of content that's in someone's feed. Who knows? So we want to find that pattern in the data, and we do that analysis in order to do it. Whether we're doing that through survey numbers that we received, or looking at the different responses that the different participants we talked to gave during interviews. Then we want to put it all together into a findings report. You could present it in class or at a conference. Sometimes Obviously, people are publishing the results of their studies and everything like that. And that's the process that we go through. And really, without this process that you see on your screen here, we're just throwing darts in the dark, right? With it, we're building knowledge that people can really trust and can really rely on. And that's a huge difference, especially in something like the social sciences. And then finally, we got into ethics. We saw how researchers in the past tried to justify harming a few people for the greater good. We looked at Nazi experiments during World War II and how that led to the Nuremberg codes. We talked about the Tuskegee syphilis study right here in the U.S. And those disasters, they really forced us to create the Belmont Report. And it had its three principles that were incited with justice, fairness in who gets the risks and who gets the benefit, right? We don't want to prioritize one group of people over another. If there's a benefit that's to be had from a study, everyone should be in it. Or if there's some kind of some kind of risk, everyone should be involved in that as well. We don't want to exploit vulnerable groups just because that's easier for us as researchers. And we talked about beneficence, and here comes one of those big clunky research words, right? These researchers love their big words, right? Beneficence, it really just means do good and minimize the harm. Protect your participants, weigh the risks, and don't put people through unnecessary stress or danger. And it really makes you wonder, right, when you look at a word like beneficence, like, why couldn't they just said that to begin with? Why do they have to have these $5 words? But I digress. And then, of course, respect for persons was the other one. People, they have autonomy, which is just a fancy way of saying they get to make their own decisions about whether or not to participate in the study. And that's why researchers need to get informed consent and be clear about what's involved. And to make sure that these principles aren't just words on paper, we've got the IRB, right? They're the referee who that makes sure that research doesn't move forward without ethical guardrails in place as were laid out by the Belmont Report. So why does this matter? Why does all of this matter to us? Well, these aren't just history lessons. They're the foundation for every decision that you're going to make as a researcher, from how you phrase a survey question to how you protect someone's privacy. This is also where you start thinking about your angle, the way that you naturally approach research and the kinds of questions that you ultimately want to ask. So that's chapter one. You've seen where communication belongs in the sciences, how research gets done step by step, and why ethics keep curiosity from crossing the line. So next week, we're going to dive deeper into research with respect. So go ahead and get started on the next chapter, and I'll see you on the other side.